Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hi, I'm just going to mute your mics while we get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're about to go live. Rather, we're already live streaming right now. So if you want to share the link to the live stream, I'm just going to share it in the chat box. For all of us to sort of send it to our different networks. So thanks everyone for joining. So we're just going to get started. So as you know, we have convened this little poetry slam session so that we can, through poetry, sort of through poetry, sort of run everyone through some of the misconceptions of accessing SRHR services. It's going to be done by 3 speakers. So we're going to have Holly Pesta from the UK. We're going to have Rix, poet, a very notable writer in Kenya. He's going to run us through next. And then we're going to have Linda wrapping up the session. So why poetry? So as most people know, art definitely has like a special place in everybody's sort of art has a special place in everybody's heart. It's usually the medium that's used mostly by people to sort of express themselves. It tends to speak to a generation. It tends to speak to a large group of people, but and unifying messages to a wide range of people. So exploring how the arts, and more specifically how written poetry, can tell stories of women across the world, most especially with the journey that we've all taken within our different societies toward getting to a point where we can have these discussions about SRHR, where we can have these discussions about abortion, where we can have this discussion about reproductive health rights, is obviously something that is crucial. So I'm just going to let everybody else sort of run us through their different sort of poems. Yeah, just hoping to have an insightful session with everyone. So thanks for joining. So, Holly.
Hi, am I next? Is that the order? Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. The poem that I was going to read was written after doing some research into an archive held at a library called the Glasgow Women's Library in Glasgow, Scotland. And it's an archive of historical protests for abortion rights in the UK. So probably around from about 1970s up until the late 1990s. So it's about the kind of continuous repetitive struggle to kind of push for rights that are kind of pulled back and then pushing again and then pulling back. And I was just very moved by the kind of work that archive revealed to me that felt quite close to domestic work and very gendered work. It felt like not glorious revolutionary protest, but quite monotonous administrative effort. And so, yeah, this poem is a kind of tribute to the women that kind of pushed for the structures and the systems that made it kind of possible and easy for women like me, but also and for people like me that use those resources, but also to kind of highlight that it's never one, and it's always kind of receding and then being pulled back. And also, while it's not universal, it's almost like it doesn't, no one has it. Unless everyone who needs this kind of access has it, no one really has it. So this is a kind of tribute to that movement and its continuations. So it's called The Work and Its Record. You can't separate the work of cutting and gluing the newspaper clippings and organising the meetings and chairing and note-taking and making the tea and cataloguing and nursing and protesting and caring and nurturing and washing the cups and booking the buses and decentralising and dismantling power and educating and making the badges and tying the string and folding the box and sending the letters and filing the files and fixing the index and drawing the pamphlets and drawing the logos and filing the files and fixing the index and listing the agendas and doing the tasks and holding the door open and writing songs and singing the songs and singing the words, bring back my body, bring back my body, bring back my body to me, to the tune of my Bonnie lies over the ocean. And photocopying the songs and saving them and standing at the picket line at Armagh jail and refusing to strip and refusing to wash and sweeping the floors and linking arms and booking rooms and booking halls and booking meals, from the anti-fascist work, from the trade union work, from the work of solidarity, from the work of making money to eat, from stopping the BNP, campaigning outside train stations and blocking Enoch Powell's unborn child protection bill, from licking the stamps and posting the letters and lobbying MPs, from making love notes on the back of envelopes, from singing, from signing on, from wishing you well and saying Merry Christmas and writing, please call me, I cannot pay the telephone, from supporting the miners' strike, from supporting the steelworkers' struggle, from blocking Alton's bill and blocking the embryo bill and blocking Corrie's bill and blocking the infant life preservation bill, and the Lord Bishop of Birmingham's embryo protection bill, from writing the newsletter that says, "Dear sisters," from booking the May Day star stall, from singing schoolgirls and secretaries, working women and wives, schoolgirls and secretaries, working women and wives, from leaving a note that says, "Look at page 14, it's horrendous," and reclaiming the measure of survival from the work of survival, and resisting someone else saying when it is time for a possible survival, and what is the time of possible survival, and whose survival is possible and perceived, and what week of a body is its own week does survival start at, from fighting the details of 14 weeks, 18 weeks, 20 weeks, 24 weeks, 28 weeks, 28 weeks, 24 weeks, from knowing to survive what means lives next is different and contains the fight. What survives will not be apart from what was conceived as she conceived it. What was lived in what is conceived as survival. What survives is what is prolonged, continued, remade from what was lived after and before. Life, beyond life, is not made from outside it. What survives? The making point of survival can only be attributed to and by she who has lived. What survives? The work and the tradition of living in the worker, in the records of their songs. The determination is produced from the work done and sung, and cannot be separated from the work of the fight, from the work of asking in the given and perceived moment, who has the right to life? Or from the work of hearing one song sung to the tune of another's older song. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly, for that. It's a beautiful read. Maybe I can just pick your mind on how and why poetry, how effective poetry is, or how you feel what the role that poetry plays in conveying such messages that, like reproductive health and rights. Mhm.
Yeah, the question of why poetry is always a good question to ask yourself. I think from my perspective, I feel like poetry is a space or a process of interrogating language, where you take language that's being used to control or order a group of people or the needs of people, and you can kind of carry that language from away from that space and put it into poetry, where you can interrogate it and test it, and yeah, actually uncover some of the hidden power structures, or especially around something like reproductive rights, where the details of the difference between 14 weeks and 24 weeks are a matter of life and death, you know, but they become quite administrative, banal language, and to sort of use poetry to explore that in a more experimental way. I feel like you uncover some hidden agendas and truths and mechanisms by which people are being marginalized or pulled into or pushed out of, and pushed out of certain resources. That makes sense.
So I guess that sort of answers the question on how you feel the arts, and more specifically like written poetry, can sort of tell the stories of women and girls across the world. Also, if we could give us some insights into how it works in what we're calling the global north, yeah, in global south, like I guess you can mostly speak to the experiences that we know. But yeah, I feel like maybe what I'm gathering is that it is an important tool for getting the stories out, individualizing it and personalizing the sort of experiences undergone or for women and girls. So what solidarities can poets around the world sort of come together and promote, rather sort of bring together to promote and protect human rights, specifically access to safe and legal abortion? Like, how do you feel our role is? Obviously, people always talk about the role of artists, and I'm not going to take into your time by chatting away. But what do you feel? How can the message be unified by poets around the world, and how can it be unified in a way that it works to promote and to protect the rights of women and girls and their access to safe and legal abortion?
Yeah, I know I could listen to you talk for much longer. The questions are really insightful and really important. I think just as you said, the particular details of individual experience, as long as they're told, in relation to a particular place and circumstances, in a historical moment, they always add up. When I was looking at the history of poetry that's spoken to abortion specifically, it's quite interesting. You get every kind of experience, like Audre Lorde's kind of personal testimony about abortion is about the lack of access in that moment in 1950s America, I think, is 1950s, but and just sort of unsafe unofficial abortion and reproductive health care, and then other kind of abortion poems, to kind of put it crassly, that may be more mournful and kind of mourn the experience, and then poetry that is situated in something that feels like access to reproductive freedom is something quite liberating, and all of these experiences are kind of validate each other and join up and produce a unity through difference and through the specific examples, and to kind of normalize and share every kind of experience that we do in poetry, because we dissect experience and we push it through different metaphors, and we push experience into different kinds of relativity to other kinds of experience. So I think just as you say, just naming the individual and the specific experiences in times, in specific moments in history and geography, it all creates space for somebody else to name their experience.
Yeah, that's a powerful response. And also, because we're here and we're going to be represented by a male voice later on, I'm wondering if you can expound on the role men play, more specifically, if they can be allies in this sort of journey. I won't call it a fight. I'll call it, if they can, sort of. Though I feel like it is a fight, but like, what role do they play at that? How different is it in the Great North? Like, what sort of contrast can we sort of borrow from? And like, what are the insights with regards to the role that men play in securing SRHR?
I mean, I think the important thing is to not see it as it's not a women's issue, or if like reproductive freedom and access to safe, legal, easy abortion to whoever needs it at any time is important for everybody. And it's not, I was interested in looking at this archive specifically when in the 1980s, I think the feminist groups that were fighting for free legal access to abortion came up against the kind of very male-centered left at the time, who insisted that they join forces with trade union movements that were fighting for struggling against the steel workers and the miners. And it was Tony Benn actually who said, you need to join us and we'll support you if you support. And I think the feminist groups are like, we're not a niche group, we're everyone. We're not a union, but they had to kind of become a niche union to get the men to help them, and not that the miners or the steelworkers was a specifically kind of man's male struggle, but that was a really interesting moment in history where they had to become allies of steelworkers and miners in order to get the support back. But they were saying this is everybody's liberation is at stake in this question. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. But I think just even though it's a feminist struggle, it's important to recognize it's everybody's.
I think Linda and Rix will have different perspectives. It's going to be interesting to get that perspective, that answer from everybody. One last question, and thank you so much for, but how do you feel we can become better? Like, how does everybody sort of come together and sort of work towards something bigger than ourselves, something sort of like the cause? Like, how do we, if I ask like a very metaphysical question, but not in terms of who we are as people. That one we can all work on as individuals. But if we're all unified in this sort of cause, and we're all looking to sort of secure the same thing for the same group of people, then how can we sort of come together and become better allies within, more specifically, the feminist movement?
Yeah. I mean, I would never try and answer that question for anybody other than myself. And as a white, I was going to say European, but I'm not European anymore. As a white British woman, I have to, I've have access to resources that are beyond, beyond the dreams of, and just beyond, like way beyond the reach of my sisters in, around the world. And as long as that's the case, I shouldn't relax and feel like I truly have them. And I think whenever and to be so aware not only of the privilege of resources that are available to me, but how they're not enough. It's still to access reproductive and abortions in the UK is free if you have an NHS number. If you don't, it's somewhere between £500 and £1,500. And with that, when you're living within that inequality, you shouldn't and you mustn't relax or feel like it's it's done or it's won. As long as I can just walk into a clinic and get it for free, and a migrant woman can not walk into the same clinic and not access it for free, it's not done. And I think the work is to just be as aware of that as possible for me, and to kind of keep pushing and keep it up for everyone.
Yeah. Well, okay. We have some speakers here. I don't know if anybody has any insights. We have some participants. Before I move on to the next poet. Okay. So thank you so much, Holly, for the great reading and for the great responses to the questions.
Thank you.
I'm going to...
Yeah. Sorry to say. I think Tushabe had raised their hand on video.
Okay. Hi, Tushabe.
Hi. I was waiting for the feature to raise the hand, but then I didn't see it. So
Mhm.
following up on, thank you so much, Holly, and everybody, for including me in this forum. So I'm happy. I enjoyed your poem. Following up on your last answer to the question I wanted to ask, how do you think people who have privilege, what could they do to give up the privilege so that those who don't have a specific, privilege can share in it, so that it's no longer a privilege for the few, but it's a right for all of us? Because I think we are doing a good job, working, speaking for, as people put it, for those who don't have a voice, working on behalf of those who can't work for themselves, but we keep the privileges that we have, which means that we maintain the hierarchies and the separations in society. So how can those who have the privilege give it up? What do they have to do to share it?
Yeah, that's an exceptionally important question, and one that I have to work on every day. And I think part of my answer to that is to go into archives, which and see how we got to the point of this point of privilege and ease of access, and know what work was done, and to not forget the people that came before, and also to kind of keep learning from the processes and the resources that they provided. Now the ways to push for more rights are almost kind of the blueprints are there in history, and this is I guess in all forms of protest, and to keep communing and being in dialogue with that is definitely one of the answers to that question. And the other one of how to I guess to keep pushing for the same level of privilege and access for everybody, and just educating yourself utterly. I had to kind of dig around to know how much it costs to have the sort of healthcare that I had without an NHS number. It wasn't easy to find out, and I can imagine it being quite easy to just sort of breeze through never knowing that. That's a step. None of these are job done. That's how that's my work done. But yeah, it's I don't have the kind of practical answer other than just acknowledging that it's necessary to keep asking myself that very question that you've posed. Like, how can you use a position of privilege or give up or share or acknowledge all of these kind of work together in a way, all of these points. Yes keep writing and to not take for granted what is there, and that if you've got it, everyone should have it, or it's not valid, so it's not okay.
Okay. Thanks, Holly. So we actually just have 1 hour. So I don't know if we'll all just sort of snap our fingers together for that great reading. No? Okay. It'll catch on eventually. But thank you so much, Holly. So I'm going to move on to Rix, who's going to run us through his poem and maybe share with us some of his insights and experiences. Thanks again, Holly. Okay.
Just fell down. Hi guys, how are you?
Hi.
Now, the poem I'm about to share, I wrote this piece some 3 years ago, actually. I was commissioned to write it by an organization that was partnering with government on an SDGs event. And when I forwarded the poem, they said it came too forward. And so they wanted me to change the words of the piece. And I was like, I don't want to change them because I like what it reflects. And so I have never gotten a chance to actually perform it anywhere for 3 years. And this is actually the first time. I felt the message in the poem was so necessary that there was no way it was going to be watered down just to make people comfortable, just because they were government officials, and yet the people who asked to hear the vitality, the rawness of these words. So I'm just going to get right into it, and then the questions might come a little later. Jopin be uinja, 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 uinja. Abirogi wer, wer, wer. Wer mo amaba. Jopin be uinja, 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 uinja. I am the one you left behind. She was born into a world that tore women apart, had them say them ladies are weak. The noise in between understanding her body and growing up barely gave her time to breathe. It was, you must be this because you wear skirts too. This is your place as a girl to give sex to a man whenever he asks for it. Be nice. Nobody cared for the death of her dreams. She was not meant to be seen. Yet each time it was her turn to cross the street, somebody saw it fit to grab her hand and whistle. Whistle as if she were a stray dog, patting her ass, commanding unwelcome attention. She was only visible when they wanted. Mama was too powerless to say anything but, don't play with boys, they'll hurt you. Nothing about daddy's home matches with her back, the kicks and snares that did not make very good music, only screams and nightmares. Why were these men still the ones making laws, paying for sex and saying what food they wanted cooked? Why did her body still want them so bad? Wasn't there another way out? To live away from the burden of being a woman whose own body still felt like a foreigner's because strangers decided what she must do, what she should do with it.
Cynthia hapa, huyu ni nani huyu mzungu?
Cynthia, please unmute Eric. There we go.
Blood muted for a while. She remembered the curse that neighborhood boy spilled into her. With his blind, angry roar, that fateful evening after school, rape is ugly, but for some reason these boys like it. Her stomach came of age with time. She feared the scorn of her family. Ran away from home, the distant church felt like an old childhood friend who had no interest in rekindling yester memories of laughter and merry Sunday mornings. Something brewed inside her, resentment, confusion, and a child. One night in the news, they said, mothers are dying in hospital, giving birth to their babies, the babies they hoped to live for. Where will women be tomorrow if they all die today? The world is sick enough. And somebody needs to stop sleeping on their job to keep women safe, for mothers are the first gods we see in flesh. She was not ready to die, 17 and so low on life. Sex was already her worst dream, didn't know who to report the neighborhood boy to. He went about his business like he'd done nothing to cause any earthquakes. Doctor at the hospital said abortion was illegal. He didn't want to go to prison. They only do it to women at risk of death and something like that. She couldn't remember much. But she didn't want to be a mother. She wasn't ready to be a mother. She hadn't even known herself. What was it going to be like carrying a child? Yet she was one. Should she go to the crook in the ghetto to get rid of the fruit in her womb? Maybe she wouldn't come back like her friend Awino, who has never been the same since. Who to turn to? Nobody at home would believe her. I guess it meant it was time to leave this world, this rowdy, grinding, biased, unforgiving world. 2 days after she was reported missing, they found a suicide note in her school bag with the name of the neighborhood boy and the last line that read, "I am the one you left behind." End of poem.
Thank you so much for that. That was a beautiful read. I'm sorry we got interrupted. I like the beginning of it, I guess the use of song. So thank you so much. Beautiful words. So I'm just gonna run you through the same questions that I've asked Holly. I'm just trying to get your perspective as a man who is an ally or who is looking to secure the rights for women. Why do you feel poetry is important in dispelling sort of the lies, the mistruths, and what role can obviously poetry and art generally play? Because I understand you're a painter from what I can see in the background. So you can just give us some of your thoughts on why poetry.
Well, I just love painting. I know I'm such an amateur painter, you have no idea. But I had so much to express when I was a child because I grew up in an extremely and profusely violent home, witnessing my father being abusive to my mom and to me because I'm the eldest son. I had so much to express because my body was full of scars. My mind was full of scars. My heart was full of scars, and there was nowhere to take these emotions and feelings that I had to express. And so I was suicidal for many times in that teenage life, and I'd run away from home, became a street boy at some point, miraculously came back home. And I mean, it was a very tumultuous childhood for most parts. And so I felt like if I didn't say something, then I was gonna die. And so for me, that's when like the poetry came, like the words just had to get out somewhere, somehow, and somewhere. And so for me, poetry, because it gave me a voice. And with time, as I started sharing my work with people, that say they related with it a lot of times. And it gave me the light that beyond me speaking for myself, it could also help me speak for other people who may not have the words to articulate what I'm saying, but they feel what I'm saying, they relate with what I'm saying, they know what I'm saying, and they needed somebody to put it into words on their behalf. And I think that is the artist's blessing. The artist's blessing is I can articulate what somebody who's like me, somebody whose life I understand, and put it into language, which most people lack most times. And that's what probably art helps us to do. It helps us articulate that which so many people want to say, maybe because of the pain, because of lack of space, because of the lack of privileges, then they have no space to do that. So for me, poetry and art in general is some sort of vessel and a leeway to give life to that which we have no words to express.
Wow, that was so beautifully said. And it's a powerful voice to be able to use it for good, obviously, to represent these messages that are obviously representing what our social realities are. Wow. So I guess you've touched on it and discussed it at length about how art and poetry can be used not only to uplift, but also to empower people. So I'm just going to jump into, in your sort of world where you are an artist, you are creating these beautiful proses and these beautiful messages. How do we again consolidate? What solidarities can poets, not just in Kenya but around the world, sort of bring together to protect and promote? Because obviously you are a person who has experienced violations at a young age. So how do you feel, or what would you imagine would be the best use of art and poetry in protecting and promoting human rights for people? Some who've experienced some of the hardships.
I think before that can even be an imagination, before we can get into it being a reality, and before it can be an imagination, it will be important to actually do the actual self-work, to understand what it is that we are really about, and the vitality of this message, the essence of this message. Because I mean, we do have a lot of artists and a lot of poets who still don't understand the importance of this work and why getting these voices out is important. So for me, just as I learned from, especially Black activists in Africa, activists who were in the forefront for, in the civil rights movement, in the liberation movement in Africa and the US mostly, they did the self-work. I wanted to understand, to humanize myself, to understand my own pain first, because I cannot express somebody else's pain if I don't understand mine. I have to humanize myself. So for me, the work, and we do not talk about this enough. We have to do the self-work first before we can organize, before we can connect and network and come together to say, how can we contribute our voices so that we can even push governments for better policies and, to assure that there is like equitable distribution of resources. So for me, the more important thing in that piece is the self-work. It comes to me as almost the most important part, so that we can humanize ourselves before we can even imagine what it's like to humanize other people who are going through things we might be going through or may have gone through or may understand what their realities are that we want to express. And even like looking at the bigger picture of, in the global perspective of like poets coming together, for the importance of this message, it will be, how can we share everyday stories about what's really happening on the ground, in 2017, I was commissioned to do like an online digital storytelling around sexual and reproductive health and rights in 6 African countries. Now, prior to that, I had never heard anything about SRHR. I had no idea what that was. I was just a good storyteller, So they came to me with this African feminist organization came to me with this idea, and I was like, okay, let me read up first. And when I went to read, and because I'm a bit lucky, I have a bit of like some networks in Africa around many topics. So when I started like looking for information around SRHR, I was amazed at what's really happening on the ground, especially in rural areas where, whoa, things are thick, and women are going through the hardest things you could even imagine. And the fact that a lot of their voices are still not even being represented in these conferences that we have, for me is like, it's a huge gap, you know, like, because if we are working for things, for policies, without the people who really, really need these policies, then who are we really working for, you know? So it was such a big eye opener for me, and I realized just how much work we have on our hands, thinking of it from the African perspective, and the way our governments treat reproductive health and just health in our public healthcare system, and just how our lives are toyed around like we are toys, actually, you know. So it gave me some kind of energy to just say, I want to do more of this, because I understand so many people may not have the voice, and being that a lot of men are the ones formulating these policies, and yet they do not understand what it's like to, you know, to lack sanitary pads, for example, or to use clothes at that time of the month, or what it's like to go through the actual process of an abortion. They have no idea what it's like, but yet they're ones sitting in congresses and governments and parliaments. It doesn't make sense to me. So for me, the bigger picture is, I want to see a healthy Africa. I want to see a healthy world, and reproductive health is almost at the center of that. So there is no way we can imagine any kind of development happening in this world if we do not take care of reproductive health.
Yeah. So the next question almost seems redundant, because it's asking, like, I know you're an ally. I can pretty much pick up that you're a supporter in the cause. But do you have insights? Because you have mentioned the struggle, you have mentioned the importance of it, you have mentioned the dynamics of where this problem exists in terms of the sort of impact that it has on safe and illegal abortions, and young girls suffering from unwanted pregnancies. You've sort of delved into the scope of the problem in informal settlements. But what do you feel the role of men is? Like, how do you feel men can be allies? Just give us like A, B, C, D, if you can, of how you feel, what the ideal, I'll call it the ideal male role in allyship for this sort of, again, journey to achieving SRHR.
I think the simplest form is to give space to women and ourselves to understand their realities without putting ourselves into that space, without centralizing, like decentralizing patriarchy is essentially in the conversation around reproductive health. And to just sit back and say, and hear, and just listen, like what's really here, we want to understand. And just the other role would be like offering emotional support for this work, because it's a lot of emotional labor that so many of us do not get to really understand. You know, when I was listening to Holly and her poem around like the abortion activists who started this way back, and bill after bill that is being rejected, bill after bill that is being rejected, that's a lot of, like, you get tired, man. So to offer emotional support for this process, even just for a little girl, I have a 17-year-old sister who, I mean, she's just starting her own life right now and is in need of so much advice around this topic. So even right now, for me in my life, the number one thing is to offer support for my little sister in all ways possible, to ensure she's secure, to ensure she has the right information, to ensure that she makes her, like she exercises autonomy over her own body, like things like those. So there's so much I can say around that, but I'll stick with ABC like you asked me.
And thank you so much for that. I think you've outlined it pretty well. There's this sort of perception that if we're not out in the streets, with picket signs, that we're not performing real activism. So I'm just going to ask a question, like, how do you feel we can become better allies to the feminist movement? Like, what do you feel all of us can do? what contributions can all of us do in our day-to-day lives so that we can build this movement, support this movement,
We are really
make the
lucky in
voices heard.
I think we're really lucky in the 21st century that we have the insane privilege of technology
Yeah.
to be able to amplify people's struggles and people's complexities and people's realities, that we can share them far and wide to get to spaces in this world that were unimaginable, let's say in the 14th century, if we go back. So I think the simplest act of sharing a story, sharing a struggle online on your Twitter handle, on your Facebook page to a friend, I think helps in one way or another to humanize one another. And to say, let's listen and see what's really happening here. What can we learn from these experiences?
Yeah.
For me, I would love that every person's voice is given a space, that every person's voice is given a space and that their space is validated and their voice is validated so that I can feel safe to share what I have to share or bring to the table, and you can feel safe to share what you have to say or bring to the table. And that way it becomes a circle and all of us won't feel threatened by each other's presence, and I guess that's one way we could help each other be better allies, I guess.
Yeah, every person is given a space. Thank you so much. I'm just going to say you're incredibly deep. Thank you. Let's all snap up. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Some beautiful words and a beautiful poem. Just to let everybody know that the poems are going to be made available to the participants of this session. We're going to lay them out and send them to you after this session. And obviously there's going to be a recording of this video so you can also have to share and to distribute to your networks. So thank you again, Rix, for that. Saying thank you is a bit underwhelming. It was a beautiful session, thanks. So we're actually running out of time. We have maybe 9 more minutes. I think we're going to go over just a bit, but I'm going to welcome Linda to run us through her poem and to share with us her insights from during the session. So thanks again, and karibu, Linda.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think it's been a very interesting afternoon. It's gone in ways that I did not imagine it would, but in a very, very wonderful and beautiful way. The pieces that you've done, Holly and Rix, have touched a lot on the struggle that we are currently going through in the country, consistently fighting anti-rights, anti-feminist, anti-SRHR groups, every corner, and coincidentally shooting down every other bill that we have. But today I get to be a poet and not a lawyer, and I get to put down some of the experiences that I've had, some close, very, very close to me, and some through the experience of the work that we do at Kelin in the sexual and reproductive health rights thematic area. So my piece is called The Conflict Within. Quick fact, I have not done a poem in a very, very long time. Me and Rix go really, really way back. And I think this will be the first time I do a piece in a couple of years. And I'm very happy that I get to do it on something that is so very close to my everyday and to myself as a feminist. So The Conflict Within. Grace. Carry yourself with clean pride, go through your school, strive. Let success be the mark of your stride. There is no room for failure. Whispers. Do not fail like crows. She fell into the devil's abyss of bodily sin. Her taint is unwashable, behavior untamable. Tether yourself, child. Flee. Be successful. Do not bring me home a child without husband nor degree. Finality. Poverty reigns. They could barely bake and they could barely make ends meet. I seemingly brought the heat. Plagued, dreaded, revered, and accepted through generations. My mother told me, as her mother told her, keep those legs closed tight. Look to Jesus, and it will be all right. There were no warnings of lust, none, in fact, on lurking lustful uncles who leered and coveted what was essentially God's own child, who smashed, granted, and laughed. Nightmares that I gave into. Silence. He paid me off with a bar of chocolate. Pregnant at 14, shame was all I felt despite having knelt. Whispers, God, let this be nerves. It cannot be. I promise to be good. I will not think lewd. I will not be lewd. I will be good. Shame. It drove me to his clinic, located in the deepest part of stoic Nairobi. I only knew what I was carrying was wrong, and I carried shame. Sweat gleamed all over his face. Resistance at this point was futile. I gave in to shame, despondency, and hope. I carried it. I could not resist the pain or the unnatural way his tools glided inside my body, not at the threat of all my friends and family knowing I wasn't clean. Soon my shame would be invisible, gone. Thoughts, thoughts. Stream hot and light down my face. They help drown the quack's persistent daze and gaze. Blood everywhere. He still moves quick, hard, messy, red, pain. Thoughts. I think you would have been a girl, round-faced and chocolate-skinned like me. I reckon you would be smart. I'd be proud no matter what. A dash of white on my stained life, but still, my choice. You let me choose for us. A life divided of a noose for both of us, you and I. A life, one I would have never dreamt for you. Hope to do better. From now onwards, these thoughts I carry forth. I close my eyes and with thoughts of warmth, I pass on thoughts. It could have been better. I will do better. I hope it gets better for those who choose. I want to do better. I hope it gets better for us all. End of poem. Thank you.
That is a note to and a half to end the session on. Wow, thank you so much. Those are beautiful words and very descriptive narrative. Gosh, so it almost feels like I'm taking away from it to jump into the questions. But
Jump in.
I'm going to understand that it's a matter of journaling and it's a matter of expressing yourself. But why poetry? Why is that the medium for you to speak, be heard?
I think when I began poetry, it was an escape, a way to express myself, sharing a troublesome past like most of us in the movement have, experiences that we are not able to openly share or even go through. But increasingly now in my work, my interactions with so many women, so many young girls who go down the same road that myself and many others have had, I think is a stark reminder that we're not getting the message through and we need to use as many mediums as we can. If we're using the courts, if we're using the demonstrations that you're talking about, poetry for me, it makes you feel the experiences. It's not very bland or theoretical, but it's a representation of real experiences, and it's a wonderful medium. And I like what Maya Angelou says, you know, people will tell you many things, but the one thing that you will remember is how they made you feel. Poetry, yeah, poetry just, it makes you feel. And that for me is very important, given the environment that we have in the country, in the region, when it comes to the feminist movement, when it comes to the experiences of women, girls, our Soji communities across the continent. It makes you feel.
It makes you feel.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
it's true. I think art, any form of art, painting, music, dance, any form of expression is a positive representation of a human experience. I really do feel that to be true. So I guess you've already touched on it, on how art, specifically written poetry, can be used to,
Oh,
or
yeah.
that it's important, but maybe you can let us know some of the ways. I think that's some of the ways that it can be used to ensure girls can access SRHR, ensuring that there's awareness and knowledge and a lack of shame about the issue. Yeah.
Yeah. I think also, aside from performances, it's the key thing about documentation. Like Rix was saying, telling a story can be what we're doing right now. We are reading our poems, we're performing our spoken word. We have anthologies of collections of this poetic representations of experiences, and that's very important for the movements that are here now and for the movements that we have after us, to be able to have a documentation or a depiction of some of our experiences, to have that voice, to be able to be carried forward just from us, presenting it, to it being in written form and passed on generation to generation. I think also another key thing, or a key trend that we've seen in most recent years, I think in the last couple of decades, is going into the details of the experiences of women or persons who actually access abortions, whether it's unsafe or safe. And also realizing that within the African context, a lot of our work is undocumented. And so it's very difficult for a young feminist, a young African feminist, to be able to trace where the struggle is, or to be able to trace some of these experiences, to be able to properly contextualize. I'm very happy to see Tushabe on the call, because that's one of the things that we're trying to do as African feminists, is document our experiences, document our literary thoughts, document our feminist theories, so that we're in a position where we're consistently building a movement that's not just protesting, but that is in the books, that every other girl, couple of years down the line, they're able to access, they're able to understand where we are from, where we are, and where we need to be within the African feminist movement. And I think one of the inspirations behind bringing in Holly as our representative, a poetry representative of the global north, is that we're able to then provide a contrast, and we're able to understand that's where their movement is at that point, but also this is where we are at. So how do we join forces so that we're all together or moving towards similar goals, complementing each other, but also being very aware and alive to what's happening in each of our different contexts. And poetry is a beautiful, beautiful way to have that shared.
Yeah. Maybe the next question to follow up on that is, what do you feel are the similarities or the contrasts between what our experiences are here in Africa, talking about most of these access to abortion not being documented? I can't quite recall, but so then what are the similarities? What are the contrasts? What are the important things that are sort of missed? Or what are the important things that are being incorporated in the fight? I'm going to call it the fight now. In the fight to making SRHR accessible for everyone.
Yes. So I think one of the things that binds us together is the core driving force of what the feminist movement is, equality. But what then becomes our differing points of the journey is that we're at totally different contexts. So you'll find that what we're experiencing right now in Kenya has been experienced, for example, in the UK, but hundreds, and this is literally hundreds of years behind. I'll give an example of LGBTQI rights and how progressively England moved away from decriminalizing same-sex relations in the, I think, the 17th century, whilst we'll still have similar laws, being a common law jurisdiction, that are still in place to date. So we are feminists, we are in support of sexual and reproductive health and rights, we are allies, but we are totally, we are usually in different contexts. So what happens when we're brought together in a platform like this is we get to learn lessons. We get to hear from Holly and what happened in England, or for example, the most recent victory that we had in Ireland. We get to hear how that movement got to that point, and we get to see what we can borrow, right? So if they're using laws and policies complemented by women going on the streets, how does that work within our context in Kenya? You find that the same opposition groups that are within Europe or in Europe are the same opposition groups that operate within our continent. So how do we build our movement even when we're at different points of our journey? And I think this is just a very stoic representation of how we can move together as fellow feminists. Yeah.
So as a feminist, what is the role of men? How can men be allies in the journey, in the fight, in the struggle towards attaining SRHR for everybody? How, I asked Riz the same question, how would you define the ideal male role in this sort of journey?
I think he answered it quite comprehensively. I'll read, because I wrote it down, and it's something that we talk about when you're trying to break down aspects of privilege. You just give up the space, because patriarchy occupies space everywhere. If it's civic space, political space, socioeconomic space, right down to the family unit, that's patriarchy. So being born into this privilege of what patriarchy is, how you support the movement is to give up the space. That's what I would equate to actually sharing it. You just give it up. You don't introduce and say, you just give up the space. Here's the space, go with it. That's allyship, and that's powerful. And we're seeing it a lot within our movements here in the country, where consistently we are claiming that space and it is being given back to feminists, and quite specifically on the core issue which we're talking about here, access to safe abortion, sexual and reproductive health and rights. As Holly intimated in her poem, and Rix did too, the people who pass the laws in parliament, men, the Senate, men, our county assemblies, men. If we look at it at a larger scale, if we're looking at the African Commission, it's the same narrative. So giving up those spaces so that we're able to achieve equality.
So it's not being given, it's not necessarily having a seat created.
Giving up.
It's taking over a seat that's there. Yeah, okay, all right, I hear you. Okay, so lastly, how can we become better? What are the next steps? How do we continue to grow the movement? How?
I think for us, we need to continue to humanize our experiences. Rick's talked about that. I think that's very important. It's very easily carried into a conversation that's a bit too technical, that's a bit too abstract to contextualize. Humanizing our experiences, I think, is very important, where we are no longer, for example, the work that we do within civil society, where we are no longer the entities that speak for the woman in the rural areas, but she is the one speaking. We are the ones also in a position of privilege, giving it up for them to take it. I think that's also been very key and a key lesson that we need to continue learning within the movement. We all have our roles to play, but we should never forget who needs to be the face of our movement, who needs to be leading that movement if we're in positions of privilege, which we are as for learned women who have been exposed and who are able to access resources, knowledge that our fellow sisters, for example, in the villages, our fellow, colleagues within the Soji communities who are arrested and harassed every other day. Just bringing the intersectionality of it to the forefront by giving up these spaces and giving these vulnerable groups the voice, that not the voice, the space to be able to amplify their voices.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much again, and thank you for the beautiful read, the poem. Again, I'm going
You're
to tell
welcome.
everyone that the poems will be made available to everyone after this session. You're going to receive an email with all of the 3 poems from this session, as well as the video for this event. Okay, so it's 4:11. We've got 11 minutes over, but I just want to open it up to closing remarks from the poets. I'm going to start off with Holly, if you have any sort of closing remarks that you want to give, if you have any insights that you'd like to offer.
Mainly to say thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Amazing Rix and Linda were to listen to, and your questions are just outstanding, and was writing them all down, and I think a lot. I'm so happy you mentioned Ireland and the Republic of Ireland's repeal the 8th movement, and also how I didn't say and need to remember, and maybe in response to the question, how a lot of kind of colonial politics is still so much at play in so many of these issues about rights and access in different countries, and that's also what we've got to kind of keep alive as a connection, and a kind of critical connection, that we know that there isn't a separation between the activisms and the history of activism in the UK and in Kenya and in Ireland and Northern Ireland, and these are continuations that are written by colonial histories. So yeah, maybe that's also just so much adoration for the poetry of her today. It was just wonderful, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Holly. Just thank you to you as well for your insights, and thank you for adding that point on colonization, because obviously that's become really important, especially in recent times, where everybody is sort of asking, well, where did these sort of systems come from? Where did we adopt them from? Where did we get them from? So that is an important sort of perspective that maybe we can cover in our next session, because I am hoping there will be another session. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to jump into Rix. Rix, if you have, just because of time, Rix, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to give?
Mine is to also thank you so much, all of you at Kenya for including me in this conversation. I come so alive when I'm talking about these issues, and I think even my call, even as we finish, is I want to educate as many men as possible, to get them, because the women already know what their struggle is, but a lot of men are, because of all this male privilege and just being away from what's really happening, out of touch entirely. I want to sort of just poke their consciences, just get them riled up a little, make them as uncomfortable as possible. So just to help them see this is actually a matter of life and death for many women here, or any persons who need a lot of reproductive health services. And also just to inform that, all human beings need secure reproductive health care, mostly, I think it's Holly who shared this earlier. Like when we talk about these issues, it's like it's just women issues. Anytime you mention gender, somebody thinks those are women issues, but these are issues that touch on every human being who's here, um, including gender and conforming persons. So I would love that this continues, these conversations continue. You have my support on any kind of level that you may need me to come in anywhere. I'd love to support. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rix. And thank you for your final thoughts. I find it incredibly deep. So I'm sort of intimidated to offer any more sort of insights, but thank you so much. So I'm just going to jump to Linda to wrap it up for us. And I don't know if we should open it up for questions or if we should just sort of wind down. But let me get the final thoughts from Linda, and then Linda can maybe let us know if we can, how we can handle some of the questions that may be coming from this session. Thanks, Rix.
All right, cool. So I think it's been a really good afternoon, and like Cynthia said, very deep. Quite a lot of reflections in terms of the conversation that we've had here today, the impact that it has had on myself, colleagues, partners, friends who are online and who are able to view this, and also when we do disseminate the recording and people are able to have a view and have a listen and read the poems and internalize that. It comes at a very timely moment. Like I said, we've been having opposition attacks in the last couple of weeks on a reproductive health bill that we're trying to pass at the Senate. And I think it sort of centered me back into the human experience, being able to make sure that the voices of our women are at the forefront of our struggle here in Kenya, and obviously beyond, in terms of sexual and reproductive health and rights, and even making it more inclusive to our Soji communities. Gender non-conforming persons, where it's everyone enjoying their sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I am immensely thankful to Holly and to Eric for agreeing to collaborate on this event. It's your time, guys. It's your talent. It's your expertise that you've given to us, and that truly is priceless. I am most thankful for that, and also for everybody else who's been able to join us. Hopefully, we'll be doing this monthly by monthly. Just give myself, Cynthia, and the team a bit of time to internalize what powerful messages we've been able to pass here today, and to see how we can amplify that message in our poetry beyond us and beyond. We call it the choir, but just to bring more young people on board to be able to express themselves and to also hear and internalize others express some of their experiences through poetry. And yeah, we can, if anybody has a comment, we can quickly do that for maybe 3-5 minutes before we log out.
Okay, so does anybody have a question to Shabe? Do you have any final thoughts to share?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your thoughts through poetry. And I am so touched, completely touched. You drew me in and you are giving me so many thoughts. So I just want to say, and it's something I think about all the time. Do we need to rethink humanity? And the reason why I'm asking this is that I sincerely don't believe that we are here in the world to struggle from birth to death. I don't believe it. I don't believe that some people are created to enjoy life and others are created to just suffer. Like to be born and not have a house to live in, to be born and not have food, to be born and not to have the means to go to school, to have an education, to play outside, with others. And then you die like that. I don't believe that that's it. But then I see it comes from the way our society, our governments and governance is designed. In what can we do to make leaders, these politicians, into guilt? Is there an emotion, a human emotion that somebody can really feel and then feel challenged that they have to change their thievery, for example? People who eat, they take all the money that is meant to help everybody in the country, and then people just swindle it and swindle it and swindle it. And then that means that other people have to suffer. They don't have access to health care. They don't have access to reproductive health. They don't have access to all other essential needs. Do we need to think humanity? That's the thought that actually popped up in my mind and reminded me. I've been thinking it as you were reading the poems. So that's what I'm just putting out there.
I mean, as bombshells go, that's quite a way to end. Do we need to rethink humanity? So I do gather that there has to be another session, Linda, because now we have a question to answer. Thank you so much, Tishabe. I don't have a response. Does anybody have any more insights on that? That's heavy. Do we need to rethink humanity? Linda?
Like you said, Cynthia, it's profound. T is a teacher, so
Yeah.
The dramatics are seen T. But I think it goes down to humanity. All the movements, all the struggles that we have, it just boils down to humanity. And I think that's a very powerful philosophical question that we can answer or can attempt to answer. And definitely we should have another session on that. I'd love to see what poems can come out of that. But it's really powerful. I'm really I think I have been drawn into thinking big, or rather rethinking, reimagining some of the advocacy that we do, because sometimes we're stuck in a cycle that we necessarily don't know about. But I think exploring through forms of art some of these nuanced aspects of what we fight for, equality, would provide us with a very different but very wider scope of understanding and raising awareness. Thanks for that, T.
Okay. Thanks for everyone. I'm not going to take up any more of anybody's time. I've taken up so much of your time. Thanks guys for staying throughout the whole session. Just once again, the poems will be made available to you on email shortly after this, as well as this recording. This live link is also going to be sent in an email just thanking you for your participation. I obviously look forward to us having more sessions. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed the poetry. I enjoyed the insights. I enjoyed the passion and the intensity of it all. And I'm grateful, and I want to thank our poets. I don't know if we're going to snap our fingers. I don't know if I've made that catch on, but round of applause. So thank you. I'm just going to wrap this up at that point. That this is a conversation that I hope will continue. And I hope that even after this, we'll be able to sort of pick up on some of the poignant points that were presented during this session. So thank you again, and have a good afternoon. And I'll see you all next time. Linda, that's a hint. There has to be a next time. Okay. So bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for moderating. Thank you, guys. Bye. Bye. Thank you. Ciao, ciao. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Rex. Thanks, everyone. Bye.